Assembly. Good morning. How y'all doing today? I'm here to tell you it's sun shining, the birds are chirping. We made it through another spring flash flood here in eastern Oklahoma, and a bunch of damage from hail and all that. I hope everything went well for you where you're at. So today we're going to do a little readings here. We're going to go to Deaconogida 67, at Psalm 67. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make God's face to shine upon us, Selah, that your way may be known upon earth, your saving power among all nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon earth, Selah. Let the people praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. The earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, has blessed us. May God continue to bless us. Let all the ends of the earth revere God. And we go to John 14:23 through 29 for our reading from the New Testament there, and it's John 14:23 through 29. And Jesus answered him, those who love me will keep my word, and Yahweh will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but is from Yahweh who sent me. I have said these things to you while I am still with you, but the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom Yahweh will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. You heard me say to you, I am going away, and I am coming to you. If you love me, you would rejoice that I am going to Yahweh, because Yahweh is greater than I. And now I have told you this before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe. Here are the words of the Gospel of John. All right, here we are this morning, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about some of the scriptures that we had. We'll tie it in a little bit, but there's some more we're going to do. And the reason we're going to do it is I don't know if y'all recall, but a while back, one of the teachings that I brought up was in the Sacred Tree, the code of ethics that we have in the Sacred Tree, and the book Sacred Tree. That's what I'm referring to here. And it's number 11. Know those things that lead to your well-being, and those things that lead to your destruction. In other words, they're talking about you want to know those things that help to lift you up, and you also want to be aware of those things that lead to self-sabotaging behavior, which for many people is commonplace. And the question was raised, well, how do I come to know those things? And I promised to talk some more about that, and so now I am. And the easiest way that I know of to learn these things is through a path called the 12 Steps for Christians. Now, you're probably thinking about recovery right now, and let me tell you flat out, before you decide to do something else, that the 12 steps is not just for alcoholics and drug addicts, or sex addicts, or all the other addicts. There is also addiction to drama, addiction to self-sabotaging behavior, where people set themselves up for making life harder than it needs to be. Now here in Oklahoma, the politicians and many others seem to think that that is supposed to be how life is, and it's not. Let me tell you, getting saved is not enough. Emotional maturity and spiritual maturity just don't happen. They require effort. And there are specific tools which we are given both by Creator and Spirit in the world and through the Bible, biblical references on identifying the importance of doing that kind of, making that kind of effort and doing the work it takes to recognize your character defects, to own your character defects, and to change them, to do something about it. Well, and you may not be entirely cured, because there is a story in Corinthians about Paul who had a thorn in his side, or maybe more than one, which, in my understanding, sounds to me like a character defect, or more than one. And he prayed 3 times for God to remove them, and God said no all 3 times. So instead, Paul had to live with them, he was humbled by them. And he had to own them and recognize that from time to time he acted out from those thorns and had to make amends, which he did. So, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read through these 12 steps for Christians, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. And there's 2 ways that we can look at this. First of all, let me talk about this book first. 12 Steps for Christians. It's been around for quite a while, and it's not spoken about. I've been to many churches and different denominations, and I've never heard anybody talk about them, although they are very important and very real, and also very biblically based, for those of you who are concerned about that. It's put out by the Friends in Recovery. It has 12 Steps for Christians, and it's not addiction. They do talk about how the 12 Steps was originally founded over 100 years ago by Alcoholics Anonymous, Dr. Bob, I believe. Anyway, but there's a lot of biblical reference in here to support working these steps. And just so you know that there is help in doing that, there's also this book I want to tell you about. It's called the Life Recovery Workbook, and it's a biblical guide through the 12 steps. And it's based on the 12 steps for Christians. And it gives you information, questions, feedbacks, helps you explore all these aspects. And so it's very important. We are required in our Indian religious tradition to seek to understand ourselves, to grow in our maturity, spiritually and emotionally, to be of good service. And so this is a good way for us to do that. And I'm going to talk about these and give a little explanation for each one of them, and you'll have this reference information on this video so you can get it yourself. I encourage you to really take seriously what is said here and to make the effort. Because I don't know about where you live, but here in Oklahoma, emotional immaturity seems to be the norm. And like I said, I think our politicians and a lot of lay leaders and even ministers in this state seem to think that keeping people emotionally immature is the right thing to do, and it's not healthy. And it goes back. You can look at the history of the foundation of the Protestant movement, and you should look this up. You look at the foundation of the Protestant movement, and you will find that the founders, they had their challenges. So you might want to go back and think about that. I may talk about that some more one day, but right now, or maybe even later, but right now, let's get into step 1. We admitted we were powerless over the effects of our separation from God, that our lives had become unmanageable. In our tradition, we talk about being lost. When you're lost, you're disconnected from Creator, from community, from family. It's like being in the middle of a large forest and wilderness, a great and vast wilderness, not knowing which direction to go to get help. Emotionally and spiritually, it's the same way. You're lost. Even though you're surrounded by people, you're lost. You don't know your own feelings. You don't understand how you're acting out self-destructive behavior. All you do is looking around to blame others and blame everybody but yourself. Anything and everybody but yourself. And that your life is out of control. Now, have you ever felt like your life is out of control? Well, that's what this is talking about. The way you respond, the way you react, time management, all of that comes under the fact that, you didn't learn healthy management skills, you didn't learn healthy relationship skills. And step one requires us to acknowledge that our separation from God put us in a place of chaos. And we need to know how to get over that. So that's step one. And the biblical reference for this is from Romans 7:18. I know nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Being unmanageable means, you're caught up in the struggle within yourself, and you're reacting and you're acting out of that struggle and not. There's the power of spirit moving through you. You've been caught up in your character defects. Pretty heavy duty stuff. Cause a lot of harm to others and to yourself. Emotionally, spiritually, and unfortunately in many cases physically. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, that's a good one. What is sanity? As a clinician, that's a pretty good question to answer there. But first of all, what it talks about here is came to believe that a power greater than us can restore us to sanity. It means we can't do it on our own. We have to practice surrender. We have to have that willingness each and every day to surrender to that power greater than us, to God. In whatever form that you consider God. I'm not going to be a judge about that. But you have to surrender to that power greater than yourself to keep you in balance, to keep you in harmony with our Creator and all of creation. When we try to do it on our own, we screw it up. We get out of balance, we get out of harmony. Next thing you know, we're acting out of selfishness, ego, self-destructive behaviors, character defects we haven't even looked at. And the biblical basis for this is from Philemon 2:13. It might be Philippians. I'm not sure. You have to look it up. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to God's good purpose. So when you surrender your will to God's will, then you are able to move forward in a good way, to have good purpose, to take right action. Now, there's a catch there, because interpreting what is God's will can be a challenge. I mean, wow. There's some good stories about that. So think about that. What does it mean to discern God's will? Where does that come from? Again, you go back and you look at the founders of the Protestant movement, and you can see right there whether or not they were really acting out God's will. Oh boy, that's a red flag right there, isn't it? That's a biggie. I'm here to tell you. So look that up and decide what you need to do to be able to discern God's will and act according to God's good purpose. What is God's good purpose and not your own purpose? See, when we're acting from our own purpose, it means we're doing what we do because there's something in it for us. Well, God's purpose is we do what is a benefit to everyone involved and not just ourselves. So you have to think about that. Yeah. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that practicing surrender. We have to fully discern what it means to surrender. What does it really mean to totally and completely surrender our will and our lives over to God? What does all that involve? And I can tell you, especially when it comes to call, making that surrender can be tough. Because you don't know where God's going to send you, you don't know what God's going to want you to do, but you do know that there is no other way to live. Living without surrendering is chaos. It's frustration, it's resentment, it's anger, it's self-sabotaging behavior. I mean, seriously, look at the Protestant movement in North America over the last 500 years. There's your answer. Find out what's wrong with this picture, then you'll know what it means not to surrender. And when you find a good picture about surrender, then you'll know how to reach out to people in a good and healthy way. Step 3 or step 4 now. Let me back up. Step 3, the biblical reference here. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. And that's from Romans 12:1. Yeah. Be the light of the world. That's right. So you're offering yourself up in service to God, whatever God calls you to do. That's what that is all about. Okay, now we get into the second half. Well, 12 steps, we're still in the beginning here, but we're going to get into the hard part here, because the first part is about, first of all, acknowledging there's a power greater than us that we have to rely upon. And then we come to accepting that we're going to surrender to that power greater than us, to rely upon it. And then we have to move into the challenging part of it. Because like I said, first part is about getting saved, basically. Getting saved is not good enough. You got to do the work. And here comes the work. Step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In recovery lingo, as a clinician, I work with a lot of people in recovery, as a minister too. I spent decades working with people in recovery. And there's a term they call, the way to describe this is owning your side of the street. You think about, you're on a road, and there's two sides to the street. You're on the street, there's two sides. You're on one side, everybody else is on the other side. The choices they make, the behaviors they make belong to them. The choices you've made, the behaviors you have done belong to you. You can't blame them for what they've done. You can only blame yourself. That's owning your side of the street. It's about getting real, about who you are, what your motives are, what's going on in your life, what you've done. Making a searching and fearless moral inventory. Fearless. God compels us to live without fear. You heard that in our reading today from John E. right down here. You hear peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. That's from John 14:27. Christ has blessed us with His peace, requires us to move past fear into a place of courage. It takes a lot of courage to get honest with yourself, about yourself. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory. Moral inventory. Well, there is such a thing as moral injury. It's very applicable to soldiers. And as a chaplain, I do talk a lot about that with veterans. Moral injury is about doing things that violate your own conscience. Seeing things that violate your conscience. And not do anything about it. So you see, there are a lot of different ways of looking at it. When you do something that goes against what you believe to be the right thing to do, literally, it damages your soul. There's a difference between PTSD and moral injury. PTSD is about trauma and the effects that it has on you. Nightmares, bad dreams, shock reaction, fight or flight response to things that go on around you, confrontation, challenge. Moral injury is over here, PTSD is over here. PTSD affects your mind. Moral injury tears your soul. I'm speaking about this in the context of soldiers because many times soldiers are ordered to do or put in situations where they have little choice but to do something that violates their own conscience, and it damages them in a terrible way. That happens outside of the military too, where people do things that violate their conscience. For example, when you choose to go down to the bar, or nowadays if you go to a Lutheran church, you choose to go to a church somewhere and drink when you know you shouldn't be because you're driving, and you run into somebody or you damage somebody's property or you hurt somebody or kill somebody, that's a moral injury. You're going to have guilt and shame the rest of your life. And guilt is feeling bad about what you did. Shame means believing you're a bad person. If you have guilt and shame because of things that you have done or said, that's moral injury. And that is a moral inventory. So you get real with that. Spiritual or the Lamentations. Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to God. Lamentations 3:40. See, it's all in the book. It's all in the Bible about being compelled to do these things. God's been trying to get people to do this for a very long time, thousands of years. So why do you have resistance to doing this kind of work? That's a big question, isn't it? All right. Moving on now, because we got a limited amount of time. But I got to bring this one up. You guys are going to get mad at me for this, I bet. I don't know how many of you watching or listening here are Calvinists, but I'm not. Let me tell you something. Paul, and I struggled with this a long time. Paul was a murderer. Everybody knows that. Paul knew it. Now here's the thing. When Paul was on that road to Damascus, and Jesus stopped him, Paul changed his ways. He did a moral inventory. He made amends. He sought God's forgiveness. And he stopped doing that kind of behavior. Now let me tell you something about John Calvin here. For all you Calvinists out there, and you feel free to share this because it's fact. You can look it up. I encourage you to do your own research into this. John Calvin advocated, after he became a believer and he became a priest, or whatever he was doing, he advocated for murdering people who he thought were heretics. Now here's a guy who was considered to be a heretic, formed the Reformation movement, which led to the Protestant movement, and yet he allied himself with the Roman Catholic Church to murder people who he thought was a heretic. And he did this until the day he died. And 500 years later, he's a hero. All this time. And you wonder why people have trouble with Protestant Christianity. Let me tell you, that's not good. Foundation built on sand is not cool. Now's the time to make it right. Make something good come from that. Allow God to use you to make something good come from that. Do your fearless and moral inventory here. Step 5. Admit it to God, ourselves, and another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. So, there you go. Write it all down. Spill your guts to God. Own your side of the street. And yourselves. You got to get real with yourself to make progress, to move forward in a good way. And tell somebody else. Find a chaplain. Find a minister. Do it right. Get into a group, Form a group. Y'all work these together. It's better to do this in a group than it is to do it on your own. And it's tough, It's one thing to write it down, but, make your searching and moral inventory. But then you got to share it. And that's tough. That makes it real. Find out how strong your courage is, how great your faith in God is. It's heavy duty stuff, isn't it? Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. James 5:16a. It's right there. Do you have the courage to do it? Step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So here we are, we're talking about character defects. Selfishness, envy, jealousy, greed, avarice, hatred, discrimination, all these characters. I can go on all day long. There's a list a mile long of character defects. You got to write them down, you got to own them. Anything that you have ever done that has caused harm to another human being and to yourself. Come to a place after you own all that stuff and confess up. We're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character to make you a better person. To make you into that shining light, that good example for others to follow, that inspiration. I can't begin to tell you how many ministers I've known in my life who have devoted themselves to being absolutely convinced in their moral superiority and browbeating people every chance they get. Tearing people down to make themselves feel good in the name of God is not what Jesus was doing. It's not what his intention was. His intention was to inspire and uplift life. God is life. God is love. So, do you have a willingness to let God heal you? Doesn't mean he's going to do it, but you got to have that willingness to do it. Just as Paul had the willingness for God to do it. God said, no, you need some more work. You're not quite ready yet. You need to keep working on this. God may have that message for you too. We don't know. You'll find out when you get there. Humble yourselves before God and God will lift you up. James 4:10. Let me tell you now, humility is an often misused term. I've heard many Christians accuse others of not being humble. And it wasn't because the people weren't humble before God, it's because they were wanting them to submit to the will of the community, to the peers, even though they knew it was wrong. Be careful how you use that phrase, humility and humble. Being humble before God is the true test of fire. Because when people try to manipulate you into being humble before them, you have to ask yourself, what's their agenda? What's their motive? What's in it for them? Are they really walking their talk according to God's intention? Have they worked their steps? Yep. This is where you're going to learn a lot about yourself and about others' motives. What God really wants. Step 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Well, when you own them, you get real, you get down in the dirt, you do get humble before God, it's okay to ask for help. Because you come to that place of realizing you can't fix it on your own. Believe me, I know plenty of people who have tried as a therapist, seen it happen time and time again, and people failed every single time. You have to rely on the power greater than us. You've got to rely on God to help you with this. There's no other way. Without God's help, you ain't going to get it done. So, humbly ask God to remove your shortcomings as many times as you need to. If we confess our sins, God is faithful and just and will forgive our sins, or in this case wrongdoings, and purify us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. Well, we have that promise in 1 John 1:9. Then we also saw Paul struggled over and over again. God's plan is unique for each person. You're going to have to find out what God's plan for you is on your own. But you never stop asking. Step 8. And here's another hard one. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Whoa. Now when you get to be elder people, kind of like me or others, much older than me, I'm still useful. Hey. Making that list of all persons we had harmed in our lives, for many people, is a really long list. Believe me, I've seen some mighty long lists in my day. I'm here to tell you, how long is your list going to be? Don't worry about it. You start at the beginning, you keep writing, and as more stuff comes to you, old memories will pop up and you write them down, all of them. You just make that list. And you have to have that willingness to do this, to honestly get real about all this. No more blaming, no more whatever. What did you do to provoke people? Put that on your list. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Luke 6:31. Yep. You want other people to make amends to you? Well, guess what? You got to do it too. So get out there and get busy. And now this step 8 is about having a willingness to do it. So make your list and have a willingness to make amends. You have to have that willingness, the ability, the willing, the desire. Yeah, okay, I'm going to make amends. There is a caveat to that, and that's step 9. Make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And the reason they talk about that is you went, for example, if you went out and had an affair, making amends to someone, your spouse who didn't know about it, may not necessarily be the right thing to do. Are you going to cause more harm than good by making amends? So you got to think about that. It depends on your relationship. So what else? Well, I don't think of any right off the top of my head. Most people who do these steps in the church aren't necessarily criminals or abusers or having affairs or stuff like that. They do other things that are equally damaging. So you'll have to talk to somebody about this, and or talk to your minister or chaplain about this and see get some feedback on this, if whether or not it's going to do more harm than good to make that amends. But otherwise, in most cases, and I'd say 99.9%, you shouldn't have any problem making amends. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother or sister, then come and offer your gift. Matthew 5:23 through 24. Yep, do some studying here, do some research. People in recovery are supposed to have a sponsor, somebody to help them with this process, so wherever you're at, that's why you want to get a group going, help you out with this. Or have somebody who's trained in working with this to assist you in the process. Therapist, chaplain, minister, somebody that you know has done this and knows how to do it. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory and, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. All right, so this process, you've moved up to dealing with all the stuff from the past, and now we're looking to the future. To make a new creation, to allow God to recreate you into a new person, to let go of the old and become the new. Imagine an alcoholic who gets sober, does their program, moves forward from that point in sobriety, and now they've got to keep from acting out all that insanity, so this is what comes next. You've been acting out all that insanity in your life, and now you're moving forward in the same way. You still got your character defects. You're still in the process of growing and healing and maturing and evolving in a good and healthy way. So you have to be aware, on alert. Continue to take personal inventory on a regular basis, once a week, every day, once a week, once a month. You look back, you do your personal inventory, and when you're wrong, you own it. Promptly admit it. Admit it just like you do the other steps. Make sure, tell yourself, God, another person, you work the steps all over again every time. It's a continuous process to help you in your growing and evolving. And the scripture reading for this is, so if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12, and I'm here to tell you, people who think that they are perfect as they are have already fallen. If you think you're all healed up and you're fine and you're not doing anything wrong, you've already done something wrong. Guaranteed. Because you're already projecting that bogus image out there that everybody knows isn't real, isn't genuine, isn't authentic. You got to be genuine and authentic. Get real. Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Simplify your life. Simplify your priorities. When you get past this point, you're constantly on a daily basis, regular basis, you're praying for God, you're meditating on God to improve your conscious contact with God. That means growing in your relationship with God. That's what that means. You're making the effort to grow in your relationship with God through communication. You communicate with God and you allow yourself to be open and receptive to hearing from God, to allowing Spirit to speak to you. That means you have to have a willingness to turn your head off, to accept that you have a lot to learn, and move that direction. So, improve your conscious contact with God as you understand God, praying only for knowledge of God's will. Keep it simple, keep it short, praying for the knowledge of God's will for you and the power to carry it out. Wherever God compels you to do, you have the power to carry it out, because it's all about helping to improve the quality of other people's lives and not just yourself. That's God's intention for each and every one of us. It's really basic stuff, real simple stuff. So work on that. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Colossians 3:16a. Yep. Our final step, step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Wow, revelation. You've had a spiritual awakening, you're growing in maturity, spiritually and emotionally, and you want to share that. Now, how are you going to do that? Are you going to brow people into coming to 12 steps? Just like people be browbeating into believing in God or getting saved, Bible thump everybody in the head. Don't think so. That's not how it works. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others through inspiration, through being of good service, through setting an example for others to follow. so that people will want to come and be like you. That's what you do. You make the effort. Set that good example for others to follow by putting principles first. Principles of these steps first. Principles come first. So step 12, you can rename it principles first. That's what you do. In recovery programs, it's called principles before personalities. You practice your principles first, you will be of service to people. You put people first and your principles are going to go out the door. Keep your principles first. It's real easy to tell Christians who practice principles from those who aren't. I'll tell you that right now. It's real easy to discern that. And once you move into that place, you're going to be going, oh wow, look how easy it is. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Principles first. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Sisters and brothers, if someone is caught in a sin or a wrongdoing, you who are spiritual should restore him or her gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Healthy boundaries, people, is what they're talking about here. Galatians 6:1, they're talking about healthy boundaries. Yeah, that's what they're talking about. So watch those principles, keep those healthy boundaries intact. Do your studying on healthy boundaries, that'll help you quite a bit. Now this all comes, like I said, in Friends from Recovery. It's from the 12 Steps for Christians, published by RPI Publishing. This copy is from 2012. They're available. Look them up. There were some changes that I made a little bit, but that was to ensure the use of inclusive language. And you can adjust that however you like. I believe inclusive language is mandatory for all Christians, so I do that. And also too, Tree of Life, get a copy. Oh my golly, that looks like a tick crawling on this page here. They're out and about. Got it. Or a chigger. Ooh, that's a chigger. That was red. That was a chigger. All right, let me tell you now. In order to walk your talk, you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be fearless, trust in God, or be totally terrified and still trust in God and make the effort one day at a time. You're never going to stop doing these. You do them over and over again. More is going to come to you. It's okay. It's a process. It's not a destination. It's a process. An ongoing, continuous process to learn, to grow and evolve in your spiritual and emotional maturity and your relationship with God in a good and healthy way. That's what it takes. So get out there and do it. And so all the information you need is on this video on how you can get this stuff. Reach out. Reach out to others. There's other programs, Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon, for those who don't have addiction issues, that can give you some information, guidance. Ask around. Surely there's something in your community. If not, start it. Do your best. Doesn't have to be perfect. Trust in Spirit. Allow God to guide you. Make the effort. Ask questions. I'll help you in whatever way I can to the best of my ability. Very good. Peace be with you. Got a dog on you. Father.